Hello to all the 5 people that are going to see this. The other day I was out at the thrift store, as I often am, and surprisingly I found quite a collection of Jamaican records. Probably the largest collection of them that I've ever found in one place. And so I thought it was worth sharing. But I also found a few other things that I'm sure didn't come from the same source. One of them being Gene Shepherd's album here, Songs of a Love Affair. This is an American country album from the 50s, but this one is actually a UK reissue from the 80s. And during the 80s, there seemed to be a lot of this kind of stuff, of reissues of 1950s American albums in general were coming out of the UK. A lot of them country, a lot of jazz, a lot of vocal pop groups and stuff like that. I'm not exactly sure why, but it seems like the US labels that actually made these recordings just figured there wasn't enough money to be made by them keeping them in print, so they cheaply licensed them to whoever was willing to buy. And some of these smaller labels thought that there was enough money to be made for them to make it worth their while, so they put out stuff like this. The strange thing with these UK reissues is that a lot of them are actually worth just as much as the original pressings, and this is one of those cases, because it's not a tremendously rare album, the original. It sells for around $10 to $20, and this is about the same. I'm going to call this one about 15. Typically, though, the original pressings, of course, are much more sought after, so a lot of collectors don't want to get reissues, myself included. But when you find those British ones, they do hold their value a lot better than your typical reissue album. I also grabbed this, Romantic Japanese Mandolins, because I thought it might be pretty cool and sort of exotic. And some of this 50s and 60s exotica kind of stuff is collectible, but this is only worth a few bucks. And I paid $40 for this entire lot, so around $2 a piece. So that was probably something I would have been better off leaving behind, but you just never know. There's a few 45s here. A couple of these are just pretty standard Caribbean-influenced disco. This is the company Creole from the French West Indies. And this is a group called Mango. It's just a medley of cha-cha and calypso-styled stuff in disco. Not worth anything, but I wanted those for my own collection. Also, pretty surprising to find the Jamaican Reggae 45 at the thrift stores around here. It is just Cherry O Baby by Eric Donaldson, which is extremely common, but I don't think I had a copy of that in my collection yet, so that is a pretty good grab for me. And I also picked up this 45 just because it was cheap, of Bonnie and Harry Carlisle, which is on a label called Teleview Productions, which I just found something else from them recently. I think it was a custom label, so these two are sort of nightclub performers and in the Catskill area, the resorts and all that sort of thing. So you would get a few hundred copies of your record pressed by one of these companies, and then you would sell them yourself at your live shows. That's probably what this is. So in terms of quantity that are out there, these kind of things are very rare, but they're not highly desirable, so it doesn't really have any value. But I like to grab them because sometimes they sound pretty interesting. Now here's something that is valuable, and I was really shocked to see these at the Goodwill. These are two 10-inch albums of authentic Jamaican calypsos from a label called MRS, which was Mada's recording studio in Jamaica. These were originally issued on 78, all these recordings. And in the early days of LPs, when these 10-inch LPs were more common than 12-inch, they pressed these, and these were sold primarily to tourists who were visiting Jamaica. Technically, not actually calypso music, it's mento music, which is the folk music of Jamaica, but during this era was heavily influenced by calypso from Trinidad and the other islands. Mento music is extremely sought after by collectors, including myself. I'm a huge fan of this kind of thing, and this label has recorded some of the best mento music that there was in the 50s. And these are extremely difficult to find, and it's a 4-volume series. We have volumes 3 and 4 here. And volume 3 I actually couldn't even find listed anywhere on the internet. Volume 4 is typically selling between $20 and $40. One of these is in a lot better shape than the other, but for the two of them, I could easily see them selling for $50 for the pair on the internet if I was going to list these. However, I'm not. But the other two volumes in the series have sold for over 100. They really are extremely sought after, and if you can find the original 78s, which I do have, they are highly valuable also. Easily some of them are going for hundreds of dollars each on a regular basis when they come up, because they just haven't survived and they weren't made in large numbers to begin with. So that was a really exciting find. Coming along with that, something that I find also very rarely, but there was a whole bunch of Jamaican pressings of American and British music albums, regular, pop, vocal, that kind of thing. And for example, I have one here. This is Engelbert Humperdinck, who is an artist who really has no collector value whatsoever. And this record is not in very good condition. This is on the Purple London label, pressed by Federal Record Manufacturing in Jamaica. And the original, as you can see here, would have been on Decca. And that was something that happened in Jamaica, was that things were sort of consolidated onto a few different labels, regardless of where they came from. The actual sleeve is a British manufactured sleeve, not made in Jamaica. And that was pretty common. The record companies would send the master discs and equipment over to Jamaica, and they would send a bunch of covers that were made in their country. And all the Jamaicans would do is press the actual records and put them in the sleeves that they already had. That's because Jamaica doesn't produce its own paper. So they would have to import the paper to make the covers, and it would cost even more than just importing the finished covers. So why would I buy this if it's in such bad shape and really not a collector piece to begin with? Well, basically, I'm interested in figuring out what sort of stuff was being released in Jamaica. There are collectors who have put a lot of effort into compiling lists of LPs and 45s of reggae music and related genres, and they really want to find out what every last release is from a certain artist or from different labels, just so that we can have a complete picture of what was coming out in Jamaica. There was not good paperwork kept the way that there was by a lot of the British and American labels. So it's very difficult to know what is actually out there unless you find it and catalog it and work with other people to do that. So a lot of that work has been done for reggae, but there are very few collectors who are trying to do that with all of the non-reggae material that was being released in Jamaica. And stuff like this, as cheesy and sort of disrespected as an artist like this might be in today's music world, this stuff had a lot of impact on the Jamaican music scene, and they left their mark on the development of reggae music. So I think it's important to figure out what sort of foreign music was being issued in Jamaica and what was popular. And from that, we can sort of see what kind of influences a lot of the classic reggae artists might have had. So I do have an interest in finding these Jamaican pressings, and I pick them up whenever I find them. And this was really quite unusual for me to find so many. So there's your sort of lesson about why I would be interested in this kind of thing. And there you have Engelbert Humperdinck, the first one, not really having any value. But in fact, none of these really have any value, but aside from archival purposes for me. Now here's another one, Christmas Cheers from Ace Cannon. This probably would have been worth $5 or $10 actually, even if it was a standard pressing. The original label here is High Records, but again, it's the pink London label. This is actually a Jamaican-made sleeve. It has the Uniprint logo of United Printers there. So a fully Jamaican-made product. And a pretty interesting find. I'm happy with that one. Definitely will be listening to that at Christmas time. And maybe this one too. This is Jim Reeves' 12 Songs of Christmas, classic. This is also a Jamaican-made sleeve. Looks like a mid-70s reissue of what was originally a mid-60s album, and that was pretty common for some of this older stuff to stay in print for a long time in Jamaica. And in fact, if you go to some of the flea markets in Toronto and Mississauga and you go to the reggae music booths, you can still see the bootleg burned CDs of Jim Reeves that are there because his popularity has really never died out. in Jamaica. It's pretty incredible. Now here's Ray Conniff, an artist who was very popular around the world back in his day. This is an American-made sleeve, and the record shows one of those sort of interesting qualities that I'm not sure how well you're going to be able to see it, but the labels are the standard US labels. It says right on it, printed in USA. There's no indication that this is a Jamaican-made product. So how do I know it's a Jamaican-made product? Well, on the back of the sleeve is the sticker, Made in Jamaica, by Record Specialists Limited, another one of the major pressing plants there. And that was pretty common. Also, they were not only importing the covers, they were importing the labels too. Now, when I look at this label and just the way it's pressed, sort of the inconsistencies of the centering of the label, and the grooves are a bit rough around the center, and just the feel of the vinyl, I could tell this is a Jamaican pressing. I have a very good eye for that kind of thing. But had it not been for that sticker on the back, academically, there would be no way to know where it originates from. That's one of the kind of struggles that you find with this sort of product. Now here's something different. Cayman Sunshine by Len Lloyd Jr. This is, of course, from the Cayman Islands, a Calypso album, which is going to go in my collection. When I found this, I thought, just based on looking at it, that it could be one of those rare ones that would be worth quite a bit of money. But I looked it up when I got home, and it's only worth a few bucks. But will be going in my collection because I will save pretty much any Calypso record. Now here's another Engelbert Humperdinck. And again, it's that London label. This one is really in rough shape, but I'm not going to be listening to it anyway. And again, British-made sleeve. When I was flipping through these at the Goodwill, I came across the first one that had a Jamaican printed cover, and I knew right away when I felt the cover, this is a foreign pressing. And when I looked at it and I saw that it was Jamaican, I then started flipping back through and looking at some of these UK covers and US covers and realizing they were Jamaican issues as well. So you got to pay attention to things like that if you want to find this sort of stuff. Now here's something I would never ever touch had it not been a Jamaican issue. Jeanette MacDonald and Nelson Eddy. Nothing wrong with it, but it's just totally worthless. But this is an RCA Jamaican pressing from Federal again. And strangely enough, this time it's a Canadian-made cover. Another Jamaican pressing in a foreign cover. And here is another one. This is Ronnie Aldrich and his two pianos for young lovers. A nice London Phase 4 label, but at the top, Made in Jamaica by Federal. And once again, it's a US issue cover. So I flipped right past this the first time around, and then I had to come back to it. Now, you usually find at least one reggae album when you find Jamaican collections, even if they don't seem to have been fans of reggae. And of course, this time, it ends up being Byron Lee and the Dragonaires, who are extremely common and one of the biggest, most successful bands anywhere in the Caribbean. The cover is really rough, but the record is actually in good shape. It wouldn't be worth a whole lot, but it is going in my collection because that's one of the ones that I'm missing from them. I think I have about 40 of their albums here, and I'm still missing quite a lot. So that was one for me. Now here is the soundtrack of Walt Disney's Mary Poppins. And this is another Jamaican pressing, pretty early. This looks like a 1960s one to me, from his master's voice. So this is licensed from the UK HMV label. Whereas in Canada, this probably would have come out on the Disneyland or on RCA Victor. But doesn't really have any value without the cover, but it is interesting to see that that would have been issued in Jamaica. And we have a couple of pieces here, which are not Jamaican, but they are from the Humber College Big Band in Toronto. These, I figured, would be of interest to Canadian music collectors. This one here I found out sells for around $10, so that's pretty decent. This one has no internet listings as of yet, but it should go for about the same, and both very well kept. Most likely somebody bought them that went to the college and then they didn't really probably listen to them. That happens a lot with that sort of thing. Now, looking at this, you would never guess that this guy is actually a Jamaican, but he was. Willie Lopez, for old time's sake. This is on the Wildflower label, which is a great Jamaican record label. But yes, this is clearly is not reggae music, but Jamaican music is not all reggae music, or mento, calypso, whatever you want to call it. There were huge audiences for what we have here, foxtrots, waltzes, charlestons, all that sort of thing was very popular in Jamaica in the old days. And during the 1970s, there was a bit of nostalgia for those old-time genres. And that's why we see things like this getting released. It really has no value, but it's definitely a great find for my collection. I like to find these oddball Caribbean things. Because there is this idea that Jamaican record shops back in the day would have just been loaded with rare reggae and stuff like that. But the fact is, a large chunk of what you would have found in your Jamaican record store in the 70s would have been not only things like that, but your Engelbert Humperdinck and Jim Reeves and all sorts of stuff coming from the US and from the UK. It was not just an isolated island where people only listened to island music, and it isn't today. But people don't really seem to realize that a lot of the time. That there's a wide range of music that's played in the islands, just like there is anywhere else. But I like to find examples of those kind of things. I will say, though, that record does have a bit of a reggae beat going on. It's not just pure waltzes and things like that. You can tell that it's coming from the Caribbean, and that's why I enjoy it so much. But that's definitely not always true. Some of the stuff you would have no idea where it was from. Here is something else. 2-man sound, 12-inch single. This one I also looked up, and it's going for about $5 to $10. This is not a Jamaican issue. This is US, but Latin disco kind of stuff can be collectible, so I thought it was worth picking up. And then it's back into the Jamaican stuff. There's Ray Conniff. We gotta love Ray Conniff. You really see a lot of him in the discount bins. This one, I have to say, it's a US cover and US labels. And the B-side label here, I'm not sure if it's going to show up well in the video, but you can see it has this roughness around the pressing ring. That, to me, was a clue that this was Jamaican, but because there's no sticker and nothing on it indicating for sure, I was going to leave it. But then I found this one, Mexican Gold, which is clearly a Jamaican pressing. You can tell from the labels. I mean, not only from looking at them, but it also says on it, manufactured in Jamaica by Total Sounds Recording Company. And it has this sticker on it, Reader's Bookshop. And we see the same thing here on the Ray Conniff. So now I know this was sold in a Jamaican store. So I grabbed it because of that. Sometimes it feels almost like archaeology. Here's Keith Stewart, another great Jamaican artist, folk singer, who I really enjoy the music of. He has a very beautiful voice and style of guitar playing. This is one that I had not found. This is one of his harder to find albums, probably worth about $10 to $15. But again, I'm going to keep it, so it's really not relevant what it's worth. Here's another one from Reader's Bookshop, Exotic Guitars by the 300-watt Music Box. I'm curious to know what this sounds like. But again, it has standard US labels, standard US cover, but it does have on the back the sticker of Dynamic Sounds Recording Company from Jamaica. But again, if not for that, how would you know that this was Jamaican? You really would have to know. I can tell by the quality of the pressing. It just has those signs of being a Jamaican issue. But it's a good thing they put those stickers on things, because otherwise it would be really hard to tell sometimes. Here's the Jamaican Folk Singers. A little more obvious where this one is from. I already had this, but my cover is in rough shape, and this record is in rough shape. So what I'll do is just swap the covers over. But they were an interesting group. They preserved a lot of the real classic folk sounds of Jamaica. That probably some of it would be lost completely today had it not been for groups like that who were keeping it alive. And here's something interesting. Well, it's not that interesting. It's just Glenn Miller. But what's interesting to me is this price sticker, $3.99 from Festival 76, referring I assume to the Jamaican festival that has the festival song competition and all that, that whatever record store this came from was doing a sale for that. But really unusual to see something like that linked to a foreign issue and not to a reggae song that would have been a festival contender. I'm assuming that's what it's from anyway, because it is clearly a Jamaican pressing. It's marked as such. So that is an interesting find. If that is actually referring to the festival, then that's quite odd for me to see that. And lastly, this is not Jamaican, but I picked this up. Matt Dennis plays and sings Matt Dennis. And you can see the label on the cover is Trend, but this is actually a Canadian issue from Quality Records, and a very early 12-inch LP issue. It's really heavy and thick because that's how LPs were in the early days. Some of this stuff can be collectible because they weren't producing and selling as many LPs in the early 50s as they would have been in later years. This is worth about $10, so that's about what I figured. Good find at a thrift store price, but definitely not something that I'm going to be hanging on to. I really don't have any interest in listening to something like that, so that's going for sale. But the Jamaican stuff, really from an enthusiast's point of view, even though it's not stuff I really want to listen to, most of it, it's really a great find. I think it's great to unearth some of this stuff and get a better idea of what was coming out in the Jamaican music industry. So very happy with that find, and hopefully there'll be many more like it in the future.